Peter Hill Explains, where I invite you to join the science teaching conversation with me about Immanuel Kant, episode 11 of this marathon here. Last episode we did his concept of greatest good being a practical thing that you could actually achieve, and this is having arrived there through a series of things about how you can have abstract thinking, you can have consciousness, self-consciousness. From self-consciousness you can have morals and appreciation of morals. From the appreciation of morals you can have an objective that you're aiming for, which is the greatest good. But now we have 6.2, the postulates of pure practical reason. Kant argues that we can comply with our duty to promote highest good only if we believe in the immortality of the soul and existence of God. This is because to comply with the duty we must believe that the highest good is possible, and yet to believe the highest good is possible we must believe in the soul is immortal and God exists according to Kant. Consider first Kant's moral argument for belief in immortality. The highest good, as we have seen, would be a world of complete morality and happiness. But Kant holds that it is impossible for, quote, a rational being of the sensible world, unquote, to exhibit, quote, complete conformity of dispositions with the moral law, unquote, which calls for, quote, holiness, unquote, because we can never experience the propensity of our reason to give priority to the incentives or inclinations over the incentive of duty, which propensity Kant calls radical evil. But Kant claims that the moral law nevertheless requires holiness, and that is therefore, quote, can only be found in the endless progress towards complete conformity, unquote, or progress goes to infinity. What? This does not mean that we can substitute endless progress towards complete conformity with the moral law for holiness in the concept of the highest good, but rather we can represent the complete conformity as an infinite progress towards a limitless holiness. Kant continues, quote, the endless progress, however, possible only through preposition of the existence of personality of the same rational being continuing endlessly, in brackets, which is called immortality of the soul. Hence, the highest good is practically possible only in preposition of immortality of the soul, so that is, as inseparable with moral law, is a postulate of pure reason. Kant's idea is not that we should imagine ourselves attaining holiness later, although we're not capable of it in this life. Rather, his view is that we must represent holiness as a continuous progress towards complete conformity of our disposition with the moral law that begins in this life and extends into infinity. So it's just a little bit more holy every day. Kant's moral argument for the belief in God in the critique of practical reason may be summarized as follows. Kant holds that virtue and happiness are not just combined, but necessarily combined in an idea of highest good, because only possessing virtue makes one worthy of happiness, a claim that Kant seems to regard as part of the content of moral law. We can represent virtue and happiness as necessarily combined only by representing virtue as an efficient cause of happiness. This means we must represent the highest good not simply as a state of affairs in which everyone is both happy and virtuous, but rather as one in which the affairs in which everyone is happy because they are virtuous. However, it is beyond the power of human beings, both individually and collectively, to guarantee the happiness results from virtue, and we do not know any laws of nature guarantees this either. Therefore, we must conclude that the highest good is impossible unless we postulate the existence of a cause of nature distinct from nature, which contains the ground of this connection, namely the exact correspondence of happiness with morality. This cause of nature would have to be God, since it must have both of understanding and will. Kant probably does not conceive of God as an efficient cause of happiness, that is rewarded in a future life to those who are virtuous in this one. Rather, his view is probably that we represent our endless progress toward holiness, beginning this life and extending into infinity, as the efficient cause of our happiness, which likewise begins this life and extends to a future one, in accordance with the teleological laws that God authors and causes to harmonize with the efficient causes of nature. Both of these arguments are subjective in a sense that rather than attempting to show how the world must be constituted objectively in order to be the highest good to be possible, they purport to show only how we must conceive of the highest good in order to be subjectively capable of both representing it as possible and of fulfilling the duty to promote it. But Kant also claims that both arguments have an objective basis. First, in the sense that it cannot be proven objectively either that immortality or God's existence are impossible, and second, in a sense that both arguments proceed from the duty to promote the highest good, and is based on not on the subjective character of human reason, but on moral law, which is objectively valid in all rational beings. So while it is not, strictly speaking, a duty to believe in God or immortality, we must believe both in order to fulfill our duty to promote the highest good, given the subjective character of human reason. I find this really problematic, because you should have the free will to be. It's like you can be moral, but you can't be. You morally need freedom, but you have no freedom about how you're being moral. To see why, consider what would happen if we would not believe in God or immortality, according to Kant. In the Critique of Pure Reason, Kant seems to say this would leave us without any incentive to be moral, and even that a moral law would be invalid without God and immortality. But Kant later rejects this view. His mature view is that our reason would be at conflict with itself if we did not believe in God and immortality, because the practical reason would represent the moral law as authoritative for us, and so present us with an incentive that is sufficient to determine our will. But pure theoretical reason would undermine this incentive by declaring morality as an empty deal, since it would not be able to conceive the highest good as possible. I just think Darwinism, social Darwinism, has got a new explanation of that. This is we are genetically predisposed to be good because it promotes our genes. This is a whole area that Darwin hasn't been around yet. In other words, the moral law would remain valid and provide any rational being with sufficient incentive to act from duty, but we would be incapable of acting as rational beings, since it's the condition of having reason at all that its principles and affirmations must contradict one another. The only way to bring reason into in general can be used purposefully. To confirm the postulates on the grounds that pure practical reason has primacy over speculative reasons. This means, Kant explained, that if the capacity for speculative reason, quote, does not extend to establishing certain propositions affirmatively, although they do not contradict it, as soon as the same proposition belongs inseparably to the practical interest of pure reason, it must accept them, being mindful, however, that these are not its insights, but are yet extensions of its use from another, namely the practical perspective. The primacy of practical reason is a key element in Kant's response to the crisis of the Enlightenment, since he holds that the reason deserves sovereignty entrusted to it by the Enlightenment on this basis. Okay, so the Enlightenment says, look, I can figure out the laws of nature. I just have the starting points and a few equations, therefore I can figure out what man is. And he says, for some reason this doesn't actually happen, therefore there is God, but therefore we'd say we've genetically selected people. That may be one answer to it all. Thanks for listening. Another podcast, another story comes to a close. It's been a pleasure sharing this moment in time with you. May you discover truly amazing things, understand them, and tell others. Thanks for listening.